Day. And appreciate especially Skylar coming to join us on a holiday. Today, we are so excited to welcome Skylar Griggs. Skylar is a registered dietitian and the owner of Newbury Street Nutrition, and she has helped countless of our Lounge patients lead healthier lives through healthy eating. And today, she's going to talk to us about longevity through nutrition. So, Skylar, so happy to have you back for, we think, the third or fourth time. We've lost count.
I know. I was trying to calculate which number of time this was. Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Lewis, and for everyone that's joined. Thank you for spending your holiday with me. I really appreciate it. I am just going to go ahead and share my slides here. Set up my slideshow. My name is Skylar Griggs. As Dr. Lewis said, I am a registered dietitian, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk about nutrition in support of longevity. We've been getting a lot of questions in our practice about this, and I think that it's wonderful that people are so interested in how they can eat better to support brain health, longevity, cholesterol, blood pressure, all the things that kind of lead into living a long and healthy life. So thank you so much for being here today. Just kind of a broad overview of some of the items that we're going to talk about today that relate to longevity nutrition. When we think of longevity, these are kind of six things that, well, really five. And then I did want to mention GLP-1s because I feel like, when we're talking about nutrition, GLP-1s is something that has come up a lot more often. Since I started my practice about 13 years ago, I'm getting a lot more questions about those. And so I thought those could be part of the longevity conversation as well. But in terms of kind of the general lay of the land on what we'll talk about today, we'll speak about protein and kind of its role in building lean body mass and skeletal muscle mass. We'll talk a lot about my favorite topic, which if we've worked together as a patient or you've kind of followed any of my work, I talk a lot about fiber. Fiber's role in not only longevity, but in things like cholesterol, blood pressure, high cholesterol, gut health. We really, that's something I'm really passionate about, so I'll spend a few minutes on that. We'll speak about blood sugar and energy metabolism. We'll also spend some time talking about omega-3 fatty acids and the importance of healthy fats. Sometimes people, are surprised to hear that there are fats that are really good for you and that we want you to include, kind of far away from that low-fat diet trend we heard about for years and years. And then we'll spend some time talking about the importance of consistency in meal structure, why it's important to be, consistent with how often you're feeding yourself, a combination of protein and fiber, how you can kind of span out your meals during the day to support longevity and to support health. And then, as I mentioned before, no conversation on nutrition right now doesn't kind of cover this, topic of GLP-1s, drugs like Ozempic and tirzepatide that we're seeing a lot more of, Mounjaro, and in some of the research around the longevity considerations for those. So we're going to start off with kind of a discussion on protein and muscle preservation. So as much as I talk about fiber and believe it to be an integral and important part of, a healthy diet, when it's combined with protein, especially, it's got significant blood sugar stabilizing effects, which we'll hop into in a couple of topics. When we think about kind of protein itself, we're thinking about everything from animal-based proteins to plant-based proteins. Often, one question I get a lot is what is the best protein powder? Which kinds of protein drinks do you like? So what this image is showing you is just kind of the muscle cycle, how our bodies make muscle, and they make it from different sources of protein. So protein itself, and you can think about kind of food in a very broad way, is made up of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Those are kind of the three parts of food and the three categories that break down into energy in the body. So we know that adequate protein is essential for muscle and it's essential for longevity. And one of the main reasons that it's essential for longevity is because the more protein you consume, the more that you put on lean body mass. And that helps with bone density, that helps with prevention of falls, that helps with positive body composition, meaning the amount of muscle you have to the amount of fat you have. So protein, we really can't get there without protein. So protein itself makes muscle. It also increases how well your metabolism is able to work. Protein helps you build strength. So you'll often hear people say after exercise to try to make sure that you're getting enough protein in post exercise to build muscle mass. And it really supports healthy aging, bone density, and mobility. So, as individuals age, one of the main things that we really think about is fall prevention and how can we make sure that, especially for me with my patients, making sure that I'm able to get a lot of lean body mass on my patients, a healthy range, also because I know that that will help bones as well. And we can kind of talk about different ways, different types of exercise. I know many people know strength training is integral in terms of building protein. Um, and it supports healthy aging. So we kind of, spoke on this. Skeletal muscle is critical for strength, mobility, and independence as we age. Loss of muscle, which it clinically is called sarcopenia, is, related more to that higher risk of falls and also a lower metabolic rate. So the metabolism in the body actually goes down with less muscle or muscle loss. You can actually see a decline in metabolic rate, what we call basal metabolic rate or metabolism, and it can impair your glucose control. Glucose is blood sugar, which we're going to spend a little bit of time on. So, really, really important when you're thinking of that picture of longevity to think about protein, to think about how much protein you're getting. Now, the RDA for protein or the recommended dietary allowance was revised in 2005, but frankly, many of the dietitians and medical providers in the field feel that that is actually too low. And I don't disagree. I don't think we want to overdo protein, but I think that we need to make sure that it's in a range that supports skeletal muscle mass and bone density. Aging itself results in an anabolic resistance, meaning your muscles respond less to protein, to a protein dose. So as we age, it's important that we make sure that we're getting at least 1 to 1.2 grams per kilogram of protein. So kilogram is your weight in pounds divided by 2.2. So kind of a practical starting range when we're thinking about protein for most people. Again, if you have a history of kidney disease or you're on a protein restriction, this is obviously very different. I think protein needs are something that are really helpful to talk about with your provider at Lone. But kind of a practical starting broad brush range would be about 1.2 to 1.6. And that's based on a study called the Pro-to-Age study, which kind of looked at outcomes in healthy adults. So this is where I would kind of start if you're just looking for a general recommendation. The other really important thing to think about is you want to spread protein across 3 to 4 meals during the day. And the reason for that is your body can only take in so much protein at a time. So you don't want to say to yourself, okay, I'm going to get 60 grams of protein in the morning and then, carbohydrates for the rest of the day. We actually need that kind of spread of the protein over 3 meals, 2 snacks, 3 to 4 meals to kind of get the full net benefit. And of course, combining it with resistance exercise is huge. And I feel like there's been more of an awareness of resistance training, but kind of speaking with your provider about how much resistance training they recommend is really important because that's integral to kind of, building body mass. In terms of protein quality and sources, so when we think about protein and types of protein, most people think first to animal protein. So things like fish, poultry, dairy, and lean red meats. But there's also some very wonderful sources of plant proteins, anything from soy to edamame, higher protein grains like quinoa. The key is, especially when we're thinking about quality of protein, if you're able to get wild fish, organic poultry, organic dairy, lean sources of red meat, kind of cut where the marbling or the white part of the fat has been cut off. And if you are able to get that free range or organic, I think, the more local you can get it, the more organic you can get it, the better. I know sometimes that results in quite a cost increase and it can be sometimes unsustainable, but even if half the time you were able to do that, that's great. And then in terms of plant proteins, one thing that I tell my patients is try to make at least one meal a week a plant protein rich meal. There are so many benefits aside from building lean body mass in consuming plant proteins. I mean, we think about things like beans and their effect on the microbiome, which is the environment of your gut, of your stomach. We really, really like people to get a variety of plant protein. I myself love meat. I love chicken. I love fish, but I also try, to get in some plant-based proteins as well. One of the things I just wanted to note here, leucine-rich foods, so things like whey, dairy. Oh, and eggs are not on here. Eggs are a phenomenal source of protein. Phenomenal. Eggs contain something called choline, which is one of the only foods that we can get choline from, and choline is incredibly healthy for brain health. So I know that eggs got a bad rap, and obviously, if you're someone where your egg yolks have been limited to a certain amount due to cholesterol, I think, getting at least a few eggs in a week is essential. And then we know that these leucine-rich foods are really effective at triggering muscle protein synthesis. So the nice part kind of when thinking about all of this is if you're working with a dietitian and you're not sure how many eggs you should have based on XYZ, or you're not sure what kind of protein shake to choose, or these are kind of some of the things that I want you to think about when you're looking at, and I just wanted to mention this too in terms of protein, when you're looking at some of these protein shakes, what I want you to look for is I want you to make sure that the first ingredient that's listed is whey protein isolate. That's the most purest form of that whey protein, and that's going to give you the biggest benefit. Oftentimes, some of these other protein shakes are mixed with protein mixes. And so, looking for something that says whey protein isolate and going with a big brand is often your best move there. And now we're on to my favorite topic, fiber. So, fiber is basically the indigestible part of a carbohydrate. And fiber's benefits kind of span the entire body from head to toe. So, from cognition to heart health to gut health to weight. Um, in terms of kind of promoting balanced blood sugars, fiber really hits all of those categories. So, dietary fiber is the indigestible part of plant food. So, often in our practice, we say, one of the things that we say, and I took this from Michael Pollan, but is eat foods, mostly plants, not too much. And Michael Pollan is a well-known kind of food scientist, food writer. And so when we talk about fiber, we're talking about taking that indigestible part of the plant food. And we know that fiber improves cholesterol, improves blood pressure, it improves blood sugar, it has positive effects on the GI system. We know that most adults need between 30 and 40 grams of fiber per day. And to be frank with you, I think that fiber is oftentimes the most underrated and valuable player when it comes to people thinking about nutrition. One thing that we often talk about in our practice is considering the amount of net carbohydrates. So, net carbohydrates are the total amount of carbohydrates subtracting the undigestible part of them, fiber. And will talk a lot about net carbohydrates when we think about weight management. We spend a lot of time talking with patients about ways that they can lower their net carbohydrates. So the other piece that fiber plays that's essential is fiber changes the gut microbiome. So it does things like reduce inflammation, improve the immune response, and slow age-related decline. We know that any positive change in gut microbiome helps everything from the immune system to mood. Fiber also can help kind of reduce the risk of chronic diseases. What I like to tell people about fiber is think about your blood vessels and your arteries as kind of empty paper towel tubes, and the blood, we want the blood to flow through it freely. We want the blood to be able to move through it quickly. Fiber kind of goes around when it comes to cholesterol and it picks up all the extra cholesterol to make sure that that blood is very easy to flow through and very easy to move. And so it has a lot of great kind of metabolic effects in that sense. In terms of practical recommendations, so we spend a lot of time talking about variety with fiber foods. So in our practice, we talk about the whole food, meaning the whole grains, the fruits, the vegetables, the nuts, the seeds. And then we talk about foods that have added fiber. Oftentimes, added fiber can come from prebiotic fibers, or it can come from things like resistant starches. And the types of products that we often like to use in our practice are products that have a fairly low amount of carbohydrates and a fairly high amount of fiber. So something called the net carbohydrate is low. The thing about fiber is we want you to gradually increase fiber. Fiber is not something where, the average American right now is probably consuming somewhere from, 10 to 12 grams a day. In our practice, we like our patients to get somewhere between 30 to 40 grams of fiber a day. This is adults. But that's a process that you want to do slowly. We really don't want patients to forget about fluids because what fiber does is it can add bulk to the stool, and well, that's one of the reasons it increases fullness. But it also, the other thing that it can do is it can kind of keep, it kind of moves foods through the intestines. So that's why fluid is so important. So making sure that you're getting somewhere from 64 to 72 ounces of water, ideally a day, is really important while you're kind of gradually increasing fiber that way. And kind of the other thing that is not on this slide that I wanted to mention with fiber is it's the combination of having fiber and then also combining it with something that's rich in protein that will really help with satiation, fullness, kind of keeping you at a healthy weight and in turn longevity. So thinking about, when you're looking at some of these fiber-rich grains or fiber-rich fruits or vegetables, how can you kind of add protein to those? Like an example would be, avocado and a slice of high fiber toast that has some protein in it, putting like some smoked salmon on that. That combination is really important. Something as simple as an apple with peanut butter we can think about as well. Then the third kind of pillar when it comes to longevity that is really, really important is glycemic stability and energy metabolism. So we, in our practice, we get many questions about continuous glucose monitors. So continuous glucose monitors are blood sugar monitors that look at your blood sugar through what this is just this is a continuous glucose monitor. And they now make them for non-diabetics, so you can assess the way that your body responds to certain foods. Sorry, excuse me. So you can assess the way that your body responds to certain foods. So what kind of effect do certain foods have on your blood sugar? And understanding that can give you a whole kind of window into longevity. Because the more stable that we can keep our blood sugar over the course of a day, the better it is for our bodies, the better it is for longevity. So I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about kind of glycemic stability. So glycemic stability in very simple terms is stable blood sugar. So the goal is, and just to back up a little bit, when I say blood sugar, I'm talking about something called glucose or blood glucose. It's the amount of sugar in your blood that could be related, that is often related to the foods that you eat. So one of the main ways to promote longevity is to keep your blood sugar in a stable and healthy range. We want to try to avoid what I call peaks and valleys of blood sugar throughout the course of the day. So points where your blood sugar gets really high and points where your blood sugar crashes really low. We really want you to stay in a stable place, and the way that you eat directly impacts that. Frequent kind of blood sugar fluctuations is linked to higher oxidative stress, which in turn really is inflammation. We know that if your blood glucose is constantly kind of all over the place because you skipped breakfast, you had a really high stress day, you had a little bit for lunch, and you had a large dinner, which I am 100% guilty of myself, no judgment, that is going to put more stress on your body and promote more inflammation. So, something that we really try to do with patients is one of the first steps that we do when we're working with a patient is really to stabilize out blood sugar. We think a lot about blood sugar in terms of protecting your blood vessels. Um, Extremely high blood sugar over time can put stress on your blood vessels, and it can affect the way that your body, your metabolism runs, and the way that the mitochondria, which is a part of your body, we consider them to kind of be the powerhouses of the cell, the way that they function. So, stable glucose in terms of longevity is really the goal. Chronic spikes we know can damage proteins and tissues and are associated with premature aging. So, getting a sense kind of where your blood sugar is hanging out during the day is really important. This slide right here, I show all of my new patients. I have a team of wonderful dietitians that work with me, a few of which are on the call. We show people this slide from the second we start working together. So, if there's one thing you take away from today, this would really be the thing that I would want you to focus on. And hopefully, I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, but kind of the quick and dirty of this is I said earlier, foods really break down into carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. All three of those things have really different effects on your blood glucose or blood sugar. So you'll see on the left-hand side here, this says blood insulin. I also want you to think about this as blood sugar because insulin is produced in response to blood sugar or glucose. Blood sugar and glucose I'm using interchangeably. So if your blood sugar goes up, your insulin levels go up. Insulin is kind of like the superhero that comes down and lowers your blood sugar. So carbohydrates, we think of white carbohydrates, simple carbohydrates, they make your blood sugar come up and come down very quickly. Protein kind of raises your blood sugar a bit, but not too much. And fat, we love good fat, doesn't raise your blood sugar much at all. If our key is to kind of keep blood sugar stable, we don't want to have a carbohydrate source. So, carbohydrates being fruits, pastas, rices, breads, cookies, cakes, pastries, tortillas, things like that. We don't want to have that by itself. We always want to think about combining carbohydrates with some kind of protein or fat. The other thing I want to say here when we're talking about carbohydrates is I'm talking about simple carbohydrates here, meaning white carbohydrates, white breads, white pastas, white rices. The high fiber carbohydrates that we use a lot in our practice, because they are so high in fiber and they kind of settle and stable things out, they're not reflected here. So those kind of high fiber carbohydrates would keep blood sugar pretty stable. So one thing I want you to think about is I never want you to have a fruit or a simple carbohydrate by itself. I want you to always think about combining it with some kind of protein or fat. Because if your blood sugar is kind of on this roller coaster purely from a weight perspective, it tells your pancreas to secrete insulin, which is right here, which tells your body to store whatever you're eating as fat. So even if you didn't eat all day long and you came home and you had a big bowl of pasta, you'd say to yourself, wait, I didn't even eat that many calories. How did why did that have such a negative effect on my weight? And the reason is because of the blood sugar cycle. Because that kind of just one bowl of pasta kind of causes a big spike and a big crash. So think of, when we think about longevity, that's one of the main things we think about. We know that blood sugar can really affect not only physical activity, but cognition. There's a diet called the MIND diet that is a really well-studied, well-researched diet that focuses on Alzheimer's risk reduction. And one of the things that they talk about in that is stabilizing blood sugar, making sure your blood sugar is in a good place. It reduces the risk of energy crashes. So kind of that up and down motion that we were talking about that leads to overeating. I notice it with myself if I didn't have a chance to grab something to eat first thing in the morning, I notice my blood sugar and my cravings are off for the rest of the day. That is a completely normal response to your body kind of trying to stabilize things out. The brain knows you need sugar, you need glucose, so it's going to go for the way that you can get it the fastest, which is carbohydrates. In terms of improving mitochondrial efficiency, so again, the powerhouse of the cell, better energy production. So if we know that kind of the way that our cells work declines as many things with age, having a stable blood sugar level will really help kind of in terms of the mitochondria. And then allowing the body to kind of switch between carbs and fats for fuel and reducing chronic disease risk is huge. I think that, something we look at in our patients sometimes is what are they burning from carbohydrates? What are they burning from fat? And how can they use those two fuel sources more efficiently? So we know that stable blood sugar levels really help with that. So in terms of kind of how to promote this glycemic stability that we've spent a little bit of time on, one of the most important things that I've been telling my patients, and I've been trying to institute myself, is after eating, going for a 10 to 15-minute walk can actually have a huge benefit on glycemic stability. Even if it's something, if you're working, even if it's something as simple as having a walking treadmill, just a foldable one underneath your desk, or taking the dog out for a walk after you've eaten lunch or after you've eaten breakfast, we know there's a lot of benefit to that. Additionally, we think about kind of that combination of protein and fiber together. So not eating the carbohydrate, even if it's a fiber-rich carbohydrate by itself. And then maintaining consistent meal timing. So, one thing that we spend time a lot on with patients is thinking about how often they're eating. So, the standard American diet right now is have a little bit for breakfast, have a little bit more at lunch, and then have a huge dinner. And I think, part of that makes a lot of sense. You're most relaxed at the end of the day. You feel like you can eat the most then. You're really rushed in the morning and sometimes through lunch, and you're not kind of able to hit the foods that you want to hit. But the problem with that is from a longevity perspective, that is not going to support longevity. What will support longevity is thinking about having something to eat every 4 to 5 hours from the time that you wake up. So if you think about it, if you have breakfast at 7:30, 8 o'clock, then by 12 o'clock, we want you to have lunch. By 3:30 or so, we want you to have a snack. And by, 6 or 7, we want you to have dinner. And for some people that go to bed later, they even need an evening snack sometimes. So thinking about, not exceeding 4-ish hours between meals is huge. Often have patients who, even do a morning snack. They'll do some kind of high fiber bar or high fiber, high protein snack that they can include. And that makes a huge difference as well. So just getting a really good sense of kind of how often you're having those meals and snacks helps your circadian rhythm. It helps with sleep. Sleep plays a huge, huge role in longevity, and is really, really important. Okay. Omega 3s. So I think one of the most common misconceptions that I've seen among patients is kind of like this fat phobia or fear of including fats in their diet because fats will make you fat or fats will affect your cholesterol. And I'm here to say and to really push that fats are really, really important for your heart if they're the right types of fats. So, in terms of kind of that total fat number that you see on the back of a food label, there are actually 4 different types of fats that make up that total fat number. So, total fat could be something called monounsaturated fatty acids, which are really good for your heart. There's polyunsaturated fatty acids, really good for your heart. There's saturated fat, which we want to use in moderation, but our body still requires, but that's the one we want to be more careful about when it comes to things like LDL cholesterol or the unhealthy cholesterol. And then there's trans fats. Trans fats were, for the most part, removed from foods. They're supposed to be removed a couple years ago. I do occasionally still see them in some items. They tend to sit in foods that, can kind of hang on the shelf for a while and never go bad. But when we are talking about healthy fats, we're talking about monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. And that's where some of these omega-3s come in. So, omega-3 fatty acids are another really key player in longevity and in brain health. So, when we think about omega-3 fatty acids, there's three different types, and they're different types of literal fatty acids, and they all kind of have a different effect on the body. The most important effect when we're thinking about longevity is their anti-inflammatory properties. So we know that omega-3s are phenomenal for brain health and for the cells, but we also know that they can be really anti-inflammatory. Now, this is not to say that everybody should start an omega-3 supplement. That is not kind of what I'm encouraging at all. What I would encourage is to try to get omega-3s from food. And if you're a vegan or a vegetarian, there are some supplemental algae-based omega-3 supplements, if okayed by your medical provider, that are great, that we include in our practice a lot because we have many patients that are plant-based as well. So omega-3 fatty acids help in terms of this kind of reducing this chronic low-grade inflammation, reducing this accelerated aging process. So, one thing that I want you to do if you do have an omega-3 supplement at home is I want you to take a look at the back of that supplement. And this talk will be recorded, and I think we may have put this on the handout, but I want you to get a really good sense of how much EPA and DHA are in that omega-3. Not the line at the bottom that says like other omega-3, but true EPA, DHA, because that tells us the true amount of omega-3 in that supplement. For some individuals, this is worth noting.
I think we lost Skylar, but I'm sure she's going to jump back on. Let's see. Hang on a sec. I think, Julia, can you text Skylar and see if she can come back on? I think she may not realize it. While we're doing that, there's just a lot of questions that are building up here, and I'm trying to answer some of them, but of course, I am not a registered dietitian. But if Cameron or Anna wants to hop in and help me answer these questions. So somebody asked if you have regularity in daily bowel movements with no constipation, can you assume you're getting enough fiber? And it's an interesting question because obviously we think of fiber as first and foremost helping us avoid constipation. But what we're learning about the gut microbiome is it goes way beyond constipation and bowel regularity. There's also other benefits to fiber, especially the fibers we call prebiotic. Oh, there she is. Hi, Skylar. I'm just kind of answering some questions, but I'm going to let you take.
So sorry, I got totally kicked off there. I can go back to my slides. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
perfect. Thank you.
No problem. Yes, I'm so sorry about that. I got completely kicked off. That has never happened to me before. I'm so sorry. Okay, so in terms of kind of the omega-3s, and the LDL raising, I was speaking to the LDL raising properties of the omega-3s. So if you're an individual who has elevated LDL cholesterol, we want to think about, does the omega-3 make sense for you? Because in some individuals with elevated LDL cholesterol, the omega-3 can sometimes have LDL raising properties. So in a way that it raises your HDL, but it could also raise your LDL. So that's a discussion to have with your providers. And then in terms of kind of the cognitive resilience, slowing age-related cognitive decline, we know that omega-3s have a huge benefit here as well. So I would like to just say, as a close to the omega-3 conversation, getting the omega-3s from omega-3 rich foods like fish, walnuts, flax seeds, that has a huge benefit in terms of improving longevity. Other things that we think about. So healthy fats, we kind of started to speak about these, but things like mono and polyunsaturated fats, they really help with insulin sensitivity, hormone balance. Replacing saturated fats with unsaturated fats can improve lipid profiles. I kind of started to talk about, saturated fats' role in raising cholesterol. Replacing some of those saturated fats with unsaturated fats is a huge benefit as well. We also know that fats provide fat soluble vitamins. So there are vitamins that are water soluble, meaning they absorb best in water, and then there are some fat soluble vitamins that require fat to be a part of the digestion of them. And fat soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. And so in order to best absorb those vitamins in your body, you need healthy fats. And that really helps kind of in terms of how much of those vitamins we're actually getting through food or through a multivitamin. So that makes a huge difference as well. Diets rich, I started to speak on this a little bit, but if you're thinking to yourself, how do I kind of boost the amount of healthy fats in my diet? We're thinking about nuts, any nut or seed, and any nut or seed butter, as long as it's a natural nut butter, meaning as long as it's a natural peanut butter, a natural almond butter, a natural walnut butter. I think sometimes those nut butters get a bad rap, and they're really, really important in terms of kind of metabolism and making sure that you're absorbing those healthy fats, vitamins, minerals. Seeds, seeds often, so in our practice, we use chia seeds, flax seeds, and another seed that not many people know about is called basil seeds. So basil seeds are truly just the seed from the basil plant. They're a very rich source of omega-3s. They're also a very rich source of fiber. So you can look into those in terms of adding them to your smoothies or your salads. Avocado, obviously, everyone knows how good those are for you. Olive oil, as kind of looked at in the Predimed study, the Mediterranean diet study, and fatty fish. We know in terms of looking at the Mediterranean diet, looking at the blue zones, lower inflammation and better metabolic health. So kind of a quick ways that you could increase omega-3s and healthy fats in your diet. So including fatty fish, some kind of fatty fish 2 to 3 times a week, whether and these can be canned fish, remember, things like canned sardines, canned salmon, or fresh wild salmon, anchovies, cod, mackerel. Fatty fish there's so many benefits to including fatty fish 2 to 3 times a week. I will say that when it comes to tuna, I would say once or twice a week would definitely be the max that I would want my patients to consume tuna, only because sometimes, an excess intake of tuna can raise blood mercury levels. And so we like to keep that, within a reasonable range. Adding daily plant-based omega-3 sources. I mentioned basil seeds here, hemp seeds, flax seeds, cooking with heart-healthy oils. When we think about heart-healthy oils, we really want to think about olive oil more as an oil that you saute with versus one that you cook at high temperatures with. When it comes to cooking at higher temperatures, we think about things like avocado oil as a better kind of, alternative. And then, as I said before, considering an EPA or a DHA supplement if your intake of some of the omega-3s is low, and obviously to be spoken about with your provider. And then, as always, trying to make sure that you're pairing fats with colorful vegetables. Just kind of one of the keys of nutrition is we want you to get as much color as possible. So a pit that I often notice myself getting into is making the same green vegetables all the time, really trying to get all different color vegetables, all different color fruits across your diet, because in each of those different colors are different types of antioxidants and vitamins and minerals. Consistency and meal structure. We kind of spoke a bit on this earlier, but regular meals regulate your circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm affects the way that you sleep. And so making sure that you've stabilized your blood sugar, you're consistently eating every 4 to 5 hours, it will reduce inflammation. The other thing that it will do, because you've stabilized your blood sugars, is that you will notice if you're doing a combination of fiber and protein every 4 to 5 hours, you're craving later in the evening for sweets, for chocolates, for the things that you know you probably shouldn't be turning to starts to go down because your blood sugar is in a healthier range. Day to day consistency of this kind of eating every 4 to 5 hours reduces chronic disease risk and will improve metabolic markers. So when we think about metabolic markers, I'm talking about things like your fasting blood sugar or glucose, your LDL cholesterol, your HDL cholesterol, your triglycerides, hemoglobin A1C. Those kinds of numbers will improve as you improve kind of the consistency and the quality of the foods that you eat. Long-term habits and kind of sustainable habits are the best ones. So, meaning whatever is going to work for you, if there is a way for you to include fiber in your diet every day by including, some basil seeds, a fiber-rich bread, and berries, well, there you go. Try to really consistently do that, most days during the week. And I tell patients it's 80-20. If you eat healthy 80% of the time, then 20% of the time you've got to live. So nothing is sustainable 100% of the time. It's just not possible for us to eat perfectly 100% of the time. And it's not fun. So if you can stick to these habits about 80% of the time, you're in good shape. In terms of the structure that we spoke about, protein, fiber, healthy fats, that's what balances blood sugar and reduces that overeating later in the day that we kind of started to talk a bit about. Um, let's see if there was anything. Yes, and then just making sure that, as I mentioned before, that your protein intake is distributed across the day and not just in your breakfast meal or not just in one meal or not just in dinner, because you really want that distribution of protein to be kind of consistent. I think we've hit most of kind of these points here, aiming for kind of 3 balanced meals, consistent snacks, aiming to make about half your plate vegetables, a quarter of it protein, and including healthy fats. And then, in terms of meal prep, keeping it simple, keeping it repeatable is huge. Okay, and then I know we're getting to the end of the talk here, so I just want to spend a second talking about GLP-1s and so when we talk about GLP-1s, we're talking about things like semaglutides, tirzepatides. You may have heard these being talked about in terms of weight management. There's a lot of commercials on TV now. They originally developed for diabetes and blood sugar balance, and they've, been showing to have a really positive effect on weight. These drugs enhance insulin sensitivity. We talked about doing a post-meal or post-snack walk to improve insulin sensitivity. So there's many lifestyle changes you can do as well. They help to stabilize appetite and cravings. So if you are on one of these drugs, I want you to know that they support longevity by lowering the risk for cardiometabolic diseases. You should not take these drugs if your doctor doesn't recommend them, of course. That would not be beneficial. But GLP-1s have a role kind of in this longevity conversation. And I think a lot of it has to do kind of in this, this glucose stability and regulation. Um, this just kind of a little bit more on the weight loss. The one thing I did want to say, and I'm sure it will come up in the questions, is we now have so many patients on these GLP-1s, and my concern with them is that the weight loss can be so significant that as you lose the weight, you also lose muscle mass. And that's where making sure that you're getting enough protein in during the day is so important, because what we don't want is as you lose weight, for you to also be losing muscle mass. So muscle preservation, making sure you're really hitting your protein targets, speaking about that with your physician is really important. I just wanted to include here these are the references for my talk today. If anyone is interested in kind of looking up some of the articles, there's some research studies here, some review articles. Feel free to kind of check those out. And I'll be sharing these slides with the group as well for anyone that is interested in them. So thank you so much. I'll
Thank you,
stop share
Skylar.
here for a second. Sorry about that little technical difficulty.
No, I was glad to see you back because I want to hear your answers, not
I know,
mine.
I'm
But
excited for these questions.
so, gosh, we've covered so much, and I think I love that you include those references because even though most of us aren't going to read them, we know that you did. So, thank you for translating all the science into practical tips that we can all use.
Of
So,
course.
lots of questions. So, I'm going to start with I'm a strict vegetarian, no eggs even. I find protein shakes to be fake food. Is that
Mhm.
accurate?
So I think that every food has a place. And I think that if you're able to get your protein from plant or animal sources first, the whole food protein, like chicken or tofu, I think that that's probably more beneficial than a protein supplement. But for many of us, just meeting that amount of protein a day can be really hard. Sometimes we don't feel like eating that amount of protein. That amount of protein in one serving feels like a lot. I wouldn't look at good protein shakes as fake food. I would look at them as kind of like a supportive option. So, a way for you to really hit your needs during the day. And I mentioned in the talk, but looking for proteins that have whey protein, isolate in them, that come from a large brand, a reputable brand is really important.
Okay, great. And would protein bars fall into that same category?
Yeah, I use protein bars. There's a couple bars I really like. So there's a bar called IQ bars that I really, really like. They only have about 12 grams of protein, but they've got a lot of fiber in them. I think Quest bars are great. I think Aloha bars are great.
Okay.
What I worry about with protein bars that are not on the list I just gave you is just purely the amount of sugar in them. That tends to be a place where people, you tend to see a lot of hidden sugars in protein bars.
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things you were talking about is some of your patients who are not diabetic wearing CGMs, those continuous glucose monitors. And
Yes.
somebody in the chat had said that wearing that for 2 weeks really helped them understand how different foods affect their blood sugar. And
Hmm.
certainly, like if you're not sure, you could try your protein bar while you're wearing it,
Yes.
ways to check and see if what's really happening when you
And
have
the
these.
other thing that you can think about, kind of like a quick hack, is if you're looking at the back of a label, as long as the serving size is the food you're looking at, right? So it says serving size 1 bar, 4 grams of sugar is equivalent to what would be like a sugar cube or a packet of sugar from Dunkin' Donuts or something like that. So if a food has more than like 6 to 8 grams of sugar, you probably wouldn't sit down and eat that amount of sugar. And so
Mm,
that's a trick that I give patients to is just kind of looking at it that way. But the CGMs are amazing. They make a huge difference.
they do. Well, what about the artificial sweeteners? So a lot of the bars you talk about, like Quest bars, have the artificial sweeteners or the non-nutritive sweeteners. What do you
Yep.
feel about those?
So I like bars that have the extract. So like monk fruit extract, stevia plant extract, because I know that it's in its purest form.
Mm,
Um, I think that alternative sweeteners, similar to protein shakes, have their role in support, but shouldn't be the main source of. I think having a small amount of them, if the bar contains a lot of fiber, if it contains healthy fats, I think the benefits probably outweigh the risks. I think we know kind of the risks of things like Equal and Sweet and Low and those types of sweeteners that we were using years ago, kind of not, being not beneficial and can sometimes be considered harmful. I think it's all kind of, your comfort level. I tend to recommend the bars with the extracts more than the
okay.
mixes.
Stevia and monk fruit.
Yeah, extract. Yes.
Great.
Yep.
Okay. Somebody is asking, I'm lactose intolerant, and most lactose-free dairy is whole fat. How much whole fat dairy is okay to have daily or weekly? This is a very hot topic, isn't it?
Yes, yes. So there's a really great graphic that I should have included in my talk that was done by a scientist at Tufts named Dr. Darius Musafarian, and he basically looked at all the different types of foods and their risk on kind of cardiovascular disease. And milk and cheese and unprocessed red meats kind of fell in the middle. Whereas more processed meats, things like salami, pepperoni, those kind of fell more towards the end, in terms of being more, more risky, industrial trans fats. So to answer the question about kind of the whole fat milk, I think that's a really individualized one. I think if you're someone who has, high LDL cholesterol and you're trying to be aware of saturated fat, I think it's good to just keep in mind how much saturated fat it has. But there's so many other benefits in terms of bone health and protein and fullness that I think it really depends on the patient's history and kind of what their goals are.
Okay. And I feel the same. I think it's less processed, which might be an advantage of whole milk. And it does seem in the literature that whole milk dairy products seem to be less
Yes,
atherogenic or less likely to cause plaque buildup and heart attacks than saturated fat from other sources.
exactly. Yes. And I think we see it similarly with cheese. You see
Yeah.
kind of that same kind of thing there.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Here's a question about fiber. Somebody asks if you have regularity in daily bowel movements with no constipation, can you assume that you're getting enough fiber?
So I think fiber can be sneaky because when I see patients, it's really hard to hit the recommended amount of fiber for the day if you're not adding in something supplemental for fiber, meaning if there's not a bread that you're using that's high fiber or a bar that you're including that's high fiber, because most fruits and vegetables have somewhere between 2 to 5 grams of fiber per serving. So the volume that you would have to eat to get to 40 grams a day, um, fiber promotes bowel regularity. So if you feel like for the most part your bowels are regular, then you're probably close to being in a good range. But that's where just tracking for a day or two could be awesome. Just to get, and I mean, I'm sorry, I mean food logging, food log
Yeah.
tracking, just to get a sense kind of where you're at.
Okay. So I had tried to answer this online and I was talking about prebiotics. So that if your goal is to have regular bowel movements, then, soluble, insoluble, it doesn't matter as long as you're moving your bowels. But
Yep.
as having regular bowel movements doesn't necessarily mean that you've helped your gut microbiome. Was that a fair statement?
Yeah, yeah. I think that the gut microbiome, well, I think the gut microbiome is something that we're still learning so much about. The signs of kind of one of the signs of a healthy gut microbiome is blood sugar. I mean, blood sugar really, really aids. If you have a healthy gut microbiome, then hopefully, stabilizing your blood sugar will only more support that. But I don't think having regular bowel movements means that you have, a healthy gut microbiome. The other thing is that there's different strains of probiotics and they all have different effects. So you don't want to just, get the probiotic off the shelf that's for everyone. It needs to be, is it specific to someone who has healthy bowel movements? Is it specific to someone who has constipation, diarrhea? Because all the different strains. And then on top of that, you don't want to use the same strains for maybe more than like 6 months. You want to switch up your probiotic because you want a lot of different types of strains too.
And how about prebiotics? Is that something that you just find in food or do you take a supplement?
Yes, yes. So prebiotics feed the probiotics. So you need both actually, and a good probiotic will have both in it. You might see prebiotic fiber in foods as inulin. Sometimes you'll see
Yeah.
it. So if you look at some of the Kind bars, they have prebiotic fibers or inulin kind of in the ingredient list. Those have a lot of benefit in terms of building a healthy microbiome as well.
Okay, perfect. Okay, here's another question. How can you selectively target visceral fat when you're trying to lose weight? I
That's a great
understand
question.
that visceral fat is more insulin resistant and therefore something to target.
Yeah, and I think that that is also something that comes up a lot when we're thinking about the, peri-menopause, post-menopausal weight gain that many women experience, and is so common. When we think about visceral fat, from a nutrition perspective, I'm thinking about strength training,
Okay.
making sure you're getting, but also what's your protein, how's your protein intake? How's your fiber intake? Are you spreading your protein intake out throughout the course of the day? And also with visceral fat specifically, how is sugar intake? Is there, and think of things not just sugar itself, but white carbohydrates, wine that breaks down to sugar. How are those kinds of things contributing to visceral fat? Because we know that visceral fat can be, very related to those types of foods. Oftentimes in postmenopausal, individuals I work with, that visceral fat is hormone driven. And so we really hone in on the fiber, we really hone in on lean protein, strength training. But visceral fat we know is the most dangerous type of fat. So hopefully as you kind of lose fat, you're losing it from the areas that, from the visceral areas that you want to by being aware of just the simple, refined white sugars and carbohydrates and things like that.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, here's another one. This is a bit of a maybe a good wrap-up question. What are the best ways to tell if you are eating healthy? Weight, regular blood work, in-body metrics, which would be body composition.
All of the above. I think weight is helpful. I think weight can be deceiving if we don't know someone's body composition, which is why I don't like to just rely on BMI as a sole
Yeah.
marker of body, of health. We really want to get a sense, and I know your office does this, of kind of
Yeah.
someone's body composition. How much lean body mass do they have? And this is where this discussion with GLP-1s, like individuals losing weight on these GLP-1s, the concern is that we don't want it to come from the muscle.
Right.
And so getting a sense kind of body composition. And then labs, I mentioned it kind of a little bit before, but we think about things like blood sugar, hemoglobin A1C, which is a picture of your blood sugar over 3 months, your cholesterol values, sometimes your liver enzymes, how do all those numbers kind of tie into and vitamin and mineral levels, B12, vitamin D is a little harder because the main source is the sun, but you can get it in some dairy products, but kind of how do those all intersect? And so I think all three kind of put the picture together, plus how you're physically feeling. And are you
Yeah.
having energy crashes during the day? If every day at a certain time you feel like you're really struggling, those are the things that you can kind of think about too.
Yeah, no, that's so important because I think when people feel great and their bowels are moving and they're sleeping through the night and their stress levels are managed and they're making healthy choices with eating, you almost know what their blood's going to show before you draw it. And
Right.
when they feel strong and they can do what we call functional exercise, like they can carry their suitcase and put it in the overhead compartment and get up off the floor with their grandkids, I think that's kind of what this is all about, isn't it? Not
Yeah.
just living longer and longevity, but of course, living well and staying healthy and independent, as you sort of discussed in your first slide.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge part of it. And I think, I don't want people to feel like they have to do a complete overhaul, just making one or two of these changes. And we actually have a handout that we're going to share with your group that kind of gives you a couple, like just 3 to 5 quick tips, things you can do right now to kind of increase longevity, increase lifespan, that make it sustainable, make it doable, because that's the stuff that's going to last.
Great. No, that's so fun. One more question here is if maybe we can add this later, but recommend brands of prebiotic and probiotics. I think like you said, it depends your goal,
It
right?
depends. I mean, when you think about supplements in general, because this is a question I get a lot, you want to think about going for a big brand, a brand that's third party tested.
Mm.
Some of them are NSF, so National Safety Foundation certified. I know your group uses something called Full Scripts. I use Full Scripts. It's a supplement dispensary. It's all third party tested. There's a lot of great brands in there that I totally trust. So that question has come up a lot in regards to creatine, which we didn't touch on
Mm.
today, but
Mm.
making sure you're getting if you decide to do creatine, making sure you're getting a reputable type of creatine supplement, that's all really important.
Okay. Thank you. So maybe in the last minute, do you want to say anything about creatine? I hear this
Yeah,
question every
creatine is
second.
having a comeback. So creatine is a supplement that we often use for promoting lean body mass. So as kind of like a way to, especially post-exercise, to increase muscle protein synthesis. And we used to not like creatine as much because it had a history of um, being contaminated back in the day with steroids, and so people really got away from it. That is not the case anymore. It's very regulated, and many of my patients take it. It's particularly helpful in building lean body mass and improving bone density. So those are the things that I'm seeing patients use it for. There's a couple brands I really like. One is called Designs for Health, Thorne, Pure Encapsulations. Those are all great creatine brands. Obviously, letting your provider know that you're taking creatine, is important, and taking the recommended amount is really important too.
Which is like 5 grams of
Which is
creatine.
5 grams pre or post exercise. Yeah, I would not exceed that. Some patients notice a little bit of like a 1 to 2 pound weight gain initially from starting creatine because you do sometimes get a little bit of bloating, but that should dissipate within the next week or two.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So helpful. Gosh. So we've talked about the importance of protein, fiber, and the balance between them, and how that some fats can actually be really healthy and healthy for your heart as well as your overall health because
Yep.
fat soluble vitamins. Um, and the importance, I think, like the nuggets of things that we can do practically to improve our health right away, taking a little walk after we eat, pairing our carbs with fats and proteins, and then keeping balance and consistency.
Yep.
Such wonderful common sense advice, all based in science. And I want to thank you so much, Skylar, for helping us all lead longer
Ew,
and
thank you for
healthier lives.
having me. It was great. It was wonderful. I could talk about this stuff all day long.
I
So thank you
know.
so much.
And thanks to the audience, your questions were awesome, and we really appreciate your attention. So thanks.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye. And if anybody wants a copy of Skylar's slides or her nutrition handout,
Yep.
email us at info@loungroup.org, and we'll be sure to get that out to you.
Thank you so much, everyone.